Before we dive into the riveting world of Roman public restroom queue management, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the Sleepless Historian channel, and don't forget to turn on loop so you can relive this extraordinary journey into the past over again. Trust me, you'll want to experience the sheer thrill of ancient restroom dynamics more than once. Who needs Netflix when you have this? Now, you might be wondering, why should I care about the line management of ancient Romans when I can just scroll through social media? Well, dear viewer, you are about to embark on an epic saga that combines the timeless human struggle of waiting in line with the rich, aromatic history of public sanitation. Yes, that's right. Today, we will explore the depths of a topic so dull that it could put even the most enthusiastic insomniac to sleep. But I assure you, it will be a journey you won't soon forget, or find interesting, for that matter. Or find interesting. Picture this, ancient Rome, the heart of an empire bustling with political intrigue, stunning architecture, and of course, the pressing need for public sanitation. While gladiators fought for glory and philosophers pondered the meaning of life, the average Roman citizen faced a far more pressing dilemma: how to navigate the chaotic lines at the nearest public latrine. Yes, folks, public restrooms were the hotspots of Roman society, and waiting in line was an art form akin to that of brushstrokes on canvas, or so we'd like to think. Yeah. As we unravel this thrilling tale of waiting, we'll delve into the etiquette of the queue, the social dynamics at play, and the unexpected innovations that emerged from a people determined to establish order amidst the chaos of human nature. We'll meet the less-than-heroic figures tasked with managing these lines, explore the ingenious strategies employed to alleviate the agony of waiting, and reflect on how the Romans' approach to restroom logistics informs our modern-day bathroom etiquette. You can even call it that. So, grab your favorite snack, settle in, and prepare yourself for a wild ride through the annals of toilet history. Relax and enjoy as we dissect the fascinating intricacies of Roman public restroom queue management, where the wait was always longer than the relief. As we step further into the swirling miasma of Roman restroom queuing, let's first examine the sheer logistics of latrine inventory procedures. Yes, while you were blissfully unaware, your ancient Roman counterparts were perhaps less fortunate, scrambling to maintain an adequate supply of the most essential restroom commodities: the sponge on a stick, known as a tessorium, and the elusive water supply. Imagine this. You're in a bustling Roman city, the sun blazing down, and the air thick with the aroma of overripe figs. You spot a public latrine, but before you even think about squatting, you must first assess the situation. Was there a stock of tersoria? A quick peek behind the stone wall reveals a wooden crate, but a hasty inspection shows that it's only half full. Panic ensues as you realize you may have to wait longer than anticipated, all while clenching your stomach tighter than a Roman Senate debate over tax reforms. Now, if you think that a simple inventory check was executed with the precision of a military operation, think again. Roman public restroom managers, or as they were known, latrinarii, were often more concerned with their lunch breaks than with adequate stocking procedures. Records suggest that many latrinarii were known to employ a system that can only be described as whatever's left. This method involved an informal tally of tersoria based on a very scientific principle referred to as eyeballing it. And inventory wasn't just a matter of counting sponges. No, dear audience, it was an elaborate affair involving the tracking of material costs, most of which came from local markets. Tersoria were not made from the softest, most luxurious materials available. Instead, they were crafted from humble sea sponges, which were harvested from the Mediterranean. The latrinari had to negotiate prices with fishermen, ensuring that they didn't spend more than a sestertius or two, lest their budget be splattered onto the mosaic floor of the latrine. And our name, Naldi. We are. Now, let's discuss the procurement of water, an element so crucial that it deserves its own chapter in our saga of bathroom management. Water for Roman latrines was typically sourced from aqueducts, those astonishing feats of engineering that brought fresh water from distant mountains to the city. However, the supply was often subject to seasonal fluctuations, and, of course, the occasional aqueduct maintenance. Imagine standing in line, sweat dripping down your forehead, as whispers of an aqueduct repair circulate through the crowd. Did you hear the Aqua Appia is down for maintenance? I heard it won't be fixed for at least a fortnight. Cue collective groans and frustrated sighs. Hello. The bureaucratic rules surrounding restroom management were as convoluted as the labyrinthine streets of Rome itself. There was, for instance, a strict regulation that latrines must be cleaned daily. This duty fell to the latrinari, who would often utilize a combination of vinegar and water, primarily because soap was a luxury item reserved for wealthy patricians. A not-so-fun fact. The cleaning process involved a delightful ritual of scrubbing the latrine seats with a mixture of water and, wait for it, urine. Yes, urine. It was believed that the ammonia in urine helped dissolve any lingering mess. Though, while the wait might have been longer than expected, at least you could rest assured knowing that cleanliness, albeit a questionable kind, was a priority. But let's not forget the social dynamics at play, because waiting in line was half the experience. Queuing was a communal activity where alliances were formed and gossip was exchanged with the fervor of a Roman playwright. The queue was a living tapestry of Roman society, featuring senators jostling for position next to merchants, townsfolk, and the occasional gladiator. The more influential you were, the more likely you could skip the line altogether. It was not uncommon for a senator to stroll up and receive a respectful bow from the waiting masses, allowing him to take his rightful place at the head of the queue, as if the latrine itself were a throne. This hierarchical queuing system led to some rather creative forms of protest from the average citizen. Some ingenious Romans devised what can only be described as a queue etiquette pamphlet, outlining the proper behavior for waiting in line. This included tips such as, don't cut in front of someone unless you have a legitimate reason, like an impending emergency, or, if you're going to gossip, ensure that it's not about a fellow cooer or risk public scorn. The pamphlets circulated among the populace, much like modern-day memes, delighting readers and instigating eye rolls in equal measure. Now, the innovations born out of this public restroom chaos were nothing short of astonishing. The Romans, ingenious as they were, introduced a system of queue tickets. Yes, in the midst of all this chaos, a rudimentary form of bureaucracy emerged, allowing individuals to collect a small wooden token with a number on it, guaranteeing their spot in the line. This was hailed as a revolutionary breakthrough, akin to the invention of sliced bread. Unfortunately, the system was rife with corruption, as it turned out that latrinari, eager to make an extra denarius, would sell tickets to the highest bidder, leaving the average citizen to fend for themselves in the ever-growing line. Let's not overlook the restroom architecture itself, which contributed to the experience of queuing. Roman latrines were masterpieces of engineering, often featuring rows of stone seats with holes cut into them, all leading directly to an intricate sewage system that whisked waste away from the populace. However, the design also encouraged idle chatter, as patrons sat side by side, discussing everything from the latest gladiatorial games to the merits of different latrine brands. You simply must try the one on Via Appia, I hear they just installed a new aqueduct. And speaking of architecture, some latrines were built with a particularly cruel twist. A strategically placed mirror above the seats, allowing those waiting outside to see who was inside. This created what can only be termed a bathroom paparazzi effect. Who could possibly focus on their moment of relief while knowing that dozens were waiting with bated breath to see their toilet-related triumph or tragedy? As we meander through the corridors of time, we must address one final, significant aspect of Roman restroom queuing: the role of the public restroom in the broader context of Roman culture. These latrines were not just places for relieving oneself. They were social hubs, akin to today's coffee shops, where ideas were exchanged, friendships were forged, and the occasional political plot was hatched. It was the one place where status and wealth were temporarily washed away, quite literally, as everyone faced the same basic human need. Now, as we stand at the precipice of this historical exploration, let's not overlook the legacy left behind by these queuing practices. In modern times, we find ourselves grappling with the same conundrums. Whether it's waiting in line at the DMV or queuing for a public restroom at a concert, we owe a debt of gratitude to our Roman forebears, who navigated the trials of public toilet logistics with a finesse that would make even the most seasoned bureaucrat proud. So, the next time you find yourself tapping your foot impatiently in line, take a moment to reflect on the Romans who stood where you stand now, grappling with the same age-old struggle of waiting for relief. After all, while history may often be considered boring, when it comes to the art of waiting in line for a public restroom, it's a riveting saga filled with drama, intrigue, and the faint scent of vinegar. The Romans and their public restrooms. A topic that truly tickles the fancy of every history buff, or perhaps more accurately, makes them squirm in their seats. Now, as we delve deeper into the nitty-gritty of Roman public restroom queue management, we must first acknowledge the unsung heroes of this epic tale: the municipal clerks who operated behind the scenes. Yes, the very ones whose daily grind involved meticulous inventory management of, you guessed it, toilet-related supplies. Picture this: a dusty office in ancient Rome, cluttered with scrolls and clay tablets, where a clerk, let's call him Gaius, sits hunched over a table, furiously scribbling down the inventory of sponges. Yes, sponges. These humble objects were the Roman equivalent of today's toilet paper, and their management was a matter of utmost importance. Gaius would painstakingly record how many sponges were in use, how many were in storage, and how many had gone missing, likely pilfered by enterprising citizens looking to cut corners on their sanitary needs. Wow. The cost of these sponges was no laughing matter either. A single sponge could run you approximately 1 denarius, a sum that could buy you a loaf of bread or a glass of mediocre wine. Imagine the budgetary meetings. Well, folks, we've overspent on sponges this quarter. We need to tighten our belts. Or should I say, tighten our... Well, you know. The pressure was palpable. Gaius would have to justify every denarius spent on sponges to the local council. And let's be honest, there's only so much one can say about the fabulous absorbency of a sponge before people start losing interest, much like our viewers at this moment. None even. But it wasn't just sponges. The Romans had to contend with a plethora of other restroom-related supplies, all of which required careful inventory management. Think of the logistics involved. Clay pots to collect waste, which, by the way, were not the charming earthenware you might find in a pottery shop today. No, these were utilitarian vessels that bore witness to some of humanity's most primal urges. The cost of these pots fluctuated based on availability, and Gaius was the man tasked with forecasting demand based on seasonal patterns. Because, as we all know, Certain times of the year simply lead to more urgent calls of nature. No. Ulu. Kwa. Paigi. And let's not forget the bureaucratic rules that governed restroom operations. Roman senators had a penchant for creating laws about everything, including how to line up for a public restroom. Yes, folks, there existed a veritable codex of queuing etiquette, a collection of guidelines ensuring that no citizen would dare cut in line. The consequences for such audacity: a hefty fine, or worse yet, public shaming. A fate worse than having to wait for an eternity to relieve oneself. In this codex, one rule stood out above the rest. Thou shalt not engage in idle chatter whilst in line. Why? Because conversations could distract individuals from the holy act of waiting, thus extending the queue unnecessarily. Imagine standing in line, only to be regaled by a fellow citizen's tale of their most unfortunate encounter with a rogue sponge. The horror, the agony, the waste of time. Instead, patrons were encouraged to engage in solemn contemplation, perhaps pondering the grandness of the empire or the existential questions of life, like why they had chosen to visit a public restroom at that particular moment. The Romans also had a keen understanding of the psychological aspects of waiting in line. They realized that the presence of distractions could alleviate the tension of the queue. To this end, they often stationed entertainers at the entrance of public restrooms, musicians, poets, and even acrobats who would perform to lighten the mood. Can you imagine standing in line, nervously glancing at your watch, only to have a juggler toss a few flaming torches your way? Delightful. Nothing says, "I can't wait to relieve myself," quite like a daredevil act designed to distract you from the very pressing matter at hand. But let us return to Gaius, our steadfast inventory manager. As a civic duty, he reported the conditions of the restrooms weekly. "The latrines of the forum are in dire need of maintenance," he might have written. "The public sponges are showing signs of wear. Immediate action is required." And oh, the drama that ensued during these reports. The local council would erupt into chaos, debating whether to allocate funds for sponge procurement or to invest in more elaborate restroom facilities. They knew a well-maintained restroom could enhance the overall quality of life for citizens, or at least make waiting in line a tad less unbearable. Money on the line. Materials for public restrooms were a significant consideration, and the Romans had a flair for the theatrical even in their choice of materials. The walls of a latrine might have been adorned with frescoes depicting the gods and goddesses of hygiene. Because if you're going to relieve yourself, you might as well do it surrounded by divine inspirations. Naturally, these frescoes wouldn't come cheap. Gaius had to keep a careful eye on the budget for renovations, which often involved raucous debates among city officials. Are we really spending 300 denarii to paint a mural of Neptune above the latrine? What are we trying to achieve? A divine endorsement of our bowel movements. Speaking of renovations, let's touch on the architectural aspects of Roman public restrooms. They were marvels of engineering, built with the utmost efficiency in mind. The Romans were pioneers of plumbing, using aqueducts to supply fresh water to public restrooms. However, any good restroom manager knew that with great plumbing came great responsibility. Gaius had to ensure that all pipes were regularly inspected and maintained, lest they lead to a catastrophic backup, embarrassing for the citizens, and a potential disaster for Gaius, whose career could be flushed away in one disastrous incident. The materials used for construction were also a matter of great debate. Should they go with budget-friendly tuff or splurge on fine travertine? Gaius knew that the choice of materials could influence the public's perception of the restroom's quality. After all, nothing screamed sophistication, quite like a gleaming marble urinal. As the saying goes, you can judge a society by how they manage their restrooms. And then there were the reports of defects. Gaius would receive complaints, often written in the most colorful language, about the state of public restrooms. The latrine on Via Appia has more flies than a pigsty. Oh, the sponges smell worse than the fish market. The bureaucratic process for addressing these complaints was a labyrinthine affair, often resulting in endless discussions over how many flies constituted a serious infestation, and whether or not the complaint warranted immediate action. Aye. In the midst of all this, Gaius had to maintain an air of professionalism. He would don his finest toga, straighten his laurel wreath, and present his reports to the local magistrate with all the gravitas of a man presenting the key to the city. "My esteemed magistrate," he would begin, "the latrines require immediate attention. Our citizens' dignity hangs in the balance." And with that, he would launch into a detailed analysis of sponge costs, wall fresco conditions, and the pressing need for additional entertainers at peak times. As we ponder upon the myriad of details that comprise the history of Roman public restroom queue management, it becomes evident that this is not merely a tale of toilets and sponges. No, this is a chronicle of civilization itself, a reflection of societal structure, bureaucracy, and the eternal struggle against nature. So, the next time you're in a line that seems to stretch into infinity, remember that Gaius and his fellow clerks were there, meticulously managing the minutiae of a very human experience. Who knew the art of waiting could be so thrilling, or at least, so profoundly boring? Well, that's history for you. A wash of absurdity and a splash of reality, all rolled into one. But let us not forget the fundamental underpinnings of this grand Roman enterprise: inventory, procedures. Indeed, managing the restroom queues was as much about stock-taking as it was about soothing the weary bowels of the populace. From the humble sponge to the ever-controversial latrine seat, every item required meticulous oversight. Picture, if you will, a clerk named Lucius, squinting under the flickering light of a single oil lamp, meticulously counting each sponge in the inventory. 1, 2, 3. But what if I miscount? He would mutter, sweating profusely under the pressure of such monumental responsibility. The fate of public sanitation, and perhaps even public morale, rested on his weary shoulders. Near deny, rentere. No, I say, we sonny, you know way, the rise or... The sponges themselves, a curious blend of natural resource and societal necessity, were subjected to rigorous cost assessment by the Senate. The yearly budget for restroom supplies didn't just appear out of thin air. It involved endless debates and protracted discussions, often more riveting than a gladiatorial battle in the Colosseum. Senators would gather, adorned in their togas, with furrowed brows and quills poised. "What shall we allocate for sponges this year?" one would ask, while another countered with, "But what about the costs of the new frescoes depicting heroic latrine scenes?" You can imagine the tension in the room as they weighed the importance of aesthetic pleasure against the pressing need for hygienic spongeware. And let's not overlook the material costs. The Roman economy, already stretched thin by wars, roads, and aqueducts, found itself grappling with the rather unexpected expense of sponge procurement. Sponges were harvested from the Mediterranean, which, as you might guess, was not merely a matter of sending out a few fishermen. No, the Senate had to negotiate prices with sponge divers, who were known for their reluctance to part with their precious finds. "How much for a sponge?" would echo through the merchant stalls, only to be met with a shrug, followed by an elaborate tale of daring dives and near-death experiences. In the end, the price tended to fluctuate like the tides, an inconvenience for any self-respecting restroom manager striving for consistency. To add further complexity to this already riveting saga, we must turn our attention to the bureaucratic rules governing the restroom experience. Yes, Even the act of waiting in line for a latrine was steeped in regulations that could make your head spin. For instance, there were strict stipulations regarding the number of patrons allowed per latrine at any given moment. 2, but no more. A restroom attendant would call out, under the watchful gaze of the magistrate, who, let's be honest, had nothing better to do than oversee the restroom operations. Heaven forbid someone tried to sneak in a third person for a quickie visit. Such transgressions were dealt with swiftly, often involving public shaming or, at the very least, a stern talking to. Moreover, the Romans were pioneers in the realm of queue organization, employing a system that could only be described as both ingenious and utterly absurd. Similar to the modern-day system of issuing tickets at a deli counter, Romans had a method of assigning numbers to patrons. Number 24, a herald would bellow, while the crowd would collectively groan, each person secretly praying they wouldn't be number 50 in line. The actual numbers were painted on pieces of pottery, which were then handed out by a clerk who had the delightful job of managing the distribution, while also keeping an eye on the sponges. If you think that waiting in line at your local coffee shop is bad, imagine this. You're stuck behind a guy who's been given number 62, and he insists on chatting about the weather for an hour before he even gets to the front. Time stood still in such a queue, with the only entertainment being the occasional bickering over who was next, and the melancholic lament of the restroom's acoustic properties. Wow. Speaking of entertainment, Roman public restrooms also had a thriving, albeit odd, subculture of performers. Yes, you heard that right. One might expect music and laughter to fill the air, but instead, patrons were often treated to the unique art of the latrine bar. These performers would regale people in line with tales of heroism, overly dramatic recitations of poetry, and occasionally, dubious comedic acts involving faux bodily functions. Picture a man clad in a toga, dramatically clutching his stomach as he mimicked the sounds of nature calling. The audience, waiting impatiently for their turn, would either roar with laughter or groan in despair, and sometimes it was difficult to tell which reaction was more genuine. This bizarre form of entertainment was, in many ways, a coping mechanism for those facing the harsh reality of their situation. After all, what could be more deflating than standing in line just inches away from a scented chamber pot? Nice. The acoustics inside Roman latrines also deserve a mention. Designed with a certain architectural flair, the latrines had an uncanny ability to amplify sounds to an ear-piercing level. A simple cough could echo like a battle cry, leading to a chorus of chuckles or horrified gasps. Rumors circulated that some particularly overzealous restroom attendants would play tricks on unsuspecting patrons by standing outside the door and creating sound effects to heighten the drama. "Oh no! What's that?" a bewildered patron would exclaim, only to realize it was just a poorly timed echo. The combination of acoustics and the overall atmosphere led to a unique restroom experience that was as much about socializing as it was about relieving oneself. As we meander further down this rabbit hole of Roman restroom history, we must also consider the maintenance of these public facilities. A group of skilled workers, often overlooked in history, were the latrine cleaners. Yes, dear viewers, they had a job that would make even the most devoted sanitation worker today shudder. Armed with a wooden paddle and a bucket of water, they bravely faced the aftermath of humanity's most basic needs. Every morning, before the sun even thought about rising, these unsung heroes would descend into the depths of the latrine, battling odors and unspeakable messes as they scraped, scrubbed, and sanitized. Yeah? Why zero? They were tasked with ensuring the sponges were clean, which sounds simple, but it involved an elaborate process of soaking, rinsing, and if the stars aligned, even soaking in vinegar. After all, nothing says ancient Rome quite like a splash of vinegar to combat the foul odors that would rise from a poorly maintained public toilet. The maintenance workers had their own unique camaraderie, bonding over the shared experience of tackling what many would consider the worst job in the empire. They exchanged tips on how to keep the smells to a minimum and shared tales of the most outrageous restroom visitors they had encountered. "You wouldn't believe the guy who tried to bring his pet goat in here last week," one would exclaim, laughter booming as they scrubbed away. And let's not forget the seasonal fluctuations that impacted restroom queue management. During the summer months, when the heat intensified, so too did the lines. The government had to adapt, issuing decrees to extend operating hours and ensuring that additional sponges were on hand. "We must accommodate the needs of our citizens," one senator would shout, as the rest of the assembly nodded, perhaps internally wishing they had chosen a different career path. Winter, conversely, brought its own challenges. Freezing temperatures meant fewer patrons, leading to a slightly less vibrant atmosphere, but more opportunities for the restroom bards to shine in the limelight. The rhythms of life in ancient Rome. The intricacies of public restroom queue management reveal not just the mundane aspects of daily existence, but the spirit of a civilization constantly grappling with its needs, both basic and complex. So, as you sit in your modern-day queue, tapping your foot impatiently, remember that somewhere in the annals of history, Lucius and his colleagues were weighing the costs of sponges and attempting to determine just how many patrons could comfortably fit in a latrine. And perhaps, in that moment of reflection, you may find a glimmer of hope that even the most absurdly boring history can serve as a source of unintentional amusement on this grand stage called life. As we plunge deeper into the labyrinthine world of Roman public restroom queue management, it's essential to appreciate the minutiae that governed every aspect of this daily ritual. You see, while the idea of a communal toilet may elicit a chuckle from the modern sensibility, to the Romans it was a veritable symposium of social interaction, albeit one that reeked of more than just idle chit-chat. Let us first examine the inventory procedures. The Roman public restroom, or latrina, was not just a humble toilet. It was an epicenter of logistical prowess. The procurement of necessary supplies was a task fraught with challenges that would make even the most seasoned supply chain manager's head spin. On any given day, a Roman restroom manager would begin their day with a meticulous inventory check, armed with nothing more than a wax tablet and a stylus. Yes, that's right, a wax tablet, the ancient equivalent of a clipboard, where one might scribble down quantities of essential items like sponges, water vessels, and fragrant oils. The sponges, oh the sponges! These delightful little tools of hygiene, often attached to a stick for optimal reach, were the primary cleaning instruments of choice. However, the cost of these sponges was a matter of great concern. A single high-quality sponge might set a manager back a hefty sum, equivalent to a week's wages for a lowly laborer. Thus, managers engaged in the fine art of negotiation with sponge merchants, mastering the delicate balance between cost and quality. Do I want a sponge that's merely serviceable or one that whispers sweet nothings about my restroom's hygiene standards? They might ponder. Spoiler alert, the wrong choice could lead to calamity, as no one wanted to be the restroom manager known for subpar sponges. In addition to sponges, there were also the highly coveted scented oils, which served the dual purpose of masking the less than pleasant odors wafting through the air and enhancing the overall experience for patrons. The procurement of these oils was an art form in itself. A good restroom manager might have had a network of perfumers, each vying for the chance to supply the finest scents, from the pungent essence of lavender to the more exotic and elusive myrrh. But alas, the costs could escalate quickly. The question loomed large. Should one splurge on a luxurious blend or stick with the ancient equivalent of a cheap air freshener? Decisions. Tenno, ihaw. Eni, enshi, deus. Moreover, the water vessels were not simply buckets. They were an intricate part of public restroom management. Water was essential for the latrines, used not only for the general cleanliness of the facility, but also for the ritual of cleaning sponges. A restroom manager had to ensure a steady supply of fresh water, which often meant liaising with local aqueduct administrators. Yes, even in the realm of bodily functions, politics loomed large. The aqueduct officials were notorious for dragging their feet, often leaving restroom managers in a lurch, scratching their heads as they watched their water supply dwindle. And then there were the bureaucratic rules governing restroom management, a veritable minefield of red tape that would make even the most patient Roman citizen question their life choices. The laws surrounding latrines were as convoluted as a Roman roadmap. For instance, there were stipulations about the maximum number of patrons allowed at any given time. Too many people crammed into a latrine could not only lead to chaos, but also, heaven forbid, create a sanitary nightmare. Thus, managers had to be vigilant, counting heads like a neurotic sheepdog, ready to issue gentle reminders to patrons about the virtues of patience and personal space. Throughout all this, restroom attendants played a vital role. More than mere custodians, these individuals were the unsung heroes of the latrine, wielding their brooms and mops like swords in a battle against filth and disorder. Each attendant had a unique style, some opting for flamboyant gestures to draw attention to their efforts, while others took a more demure approach, blending into the background like a shy wallflower at a Roman banquet. They were often seen orchestrating the delicate ballet of restroom patrons, ushering them in and out with the grace of a seasoned conductor leading an orchestra. They mastered the art of crowd control, employing a mix of gentle nudges and persuasive rhetoric to keep the flow of traffic moving smoothly. One can only imagine the attendant's internal monologue. If I can get these folks in and out without a riot, I deserve a medal, or at least a nice bottle of that fragrant oil. Now, let's not forget the bureaucratic oversight that loomed like a shadow over every latrine. The local magistrate had the power to inspect public restrooms, ensuring they met the stringent health codes of the time. Imagine the tension as a restroom manager awaited a visit from the magistrate, heart pounding like a Roman chariot on race day. One could only hope that the magistrate was in a good mood and not prepared to unleash a torrent of fines for any minor infraction. Oh, dear gods, what if I forgot to restock the lavender oil? Would echo through the manager's mind, a haunting refrain of anxiety that could plague them for days. Of course, we must also discuss the social dynamics at play within the latrina. Standing in line was not merely a test of one's bladder. It was a complex interplay of social hierarchies and alliances. The queue was a microcosm of Roman society, where the upper classes could flaunt their status by demanding priority access, while the lower classes braced themselves for a longer wait. If you were fortunate enough to be a senator or a wealthy merchant, you could easily flash a coin or two to the restroom attendant, thereby bypassing the queue with all the grace of a dolphin leaping out of the waves. Ah, the privileges of wealth. But even those at the top of the social ladder were not immune to the perils of waiting. The lines could stretch out far beyond the latrine's entrance, leading to awkward encounters and even more awkward small talk. So, how about that gladiatorial match last week? One patron might venture, only to be met with an eye roll from the person next to them, who was clearly too engrossed in their own desperate need to focus on such trivialities. The art of waiting became a lesson in patience, humor, and the occasional display of annoyance. Mordens. As patrons finally entered the latrina, they were greeted by a variety of seating options, if you could call them options. The stone benches, lovingly fashioned to accommodate multiple users, were a popular choice. But comfort was not the primary concern here. Rather, it was efficiency. It was said that the Romans believed in a swift and effective resolution to their business, and they were determined to ensure that no one lingered too long on the throne. After all, one could only imagine the grumbling from those waiting outside, tapping their feet impatiently, wondering if the previous occupant had decided to stage an impromptu concert in the stall. In a way. So as we delve into the absurdly boring history of Roman public restroom queue management, let us not overlook the dedication, artistry, and sheer determination that these restroom managers and attendants exhibited daily. Their struggles, though seemingly trivial in the grand sweep of history, offer us a fascinating window into the mundane realities of life in ancient Rome. Who knew that behind every relieved sigh and casual conversation, there were layers of complexity so rich that they could rival the most intricate tapestry? Perhaps the next time you find yourself waiting in line for the restroom, you might just take a moment to reflect on the long lineage of those who came before you, navigating the challenges of public sanitation with all the flair of a Roman citizen. And let us not forget, in the grand scheme of history, every queue has a story. Now, let's delve deeper into the world of Roman public restroom management, where the art of waiting in line takes a turn into the riveting realm of inventory procedures. Inventory. The lifeblood of any public restroom. If you thought the thrill of watching paint dry was exhilarating, just wait until we explore how Romans meticulously kept track of their toilet supplies. Imagine, if you will, a bustling Roman forum, where citizens gather not just to engage in lively debates about politics or philosophy, but also to partake in the less glamorous act of relieving themselves. Standing in line, they would be acutely aware of the restroom attendant. Let's call him Gaius, who was tasked with the monumental job of managing the restroom inventory. Every day, Gaius performed the sacred ritual of inventory counting, which could only be described as an ancient version of a corporate audit, minus the coffee breaks, and with significantly more foul odors. Gaius, equipped with nothing but a wax tablet, a reed stylus, and an iron will, would meticulously record the quantities of essential restroom supplies. This included the coveted sponge on a stick, famously known as the tersorium. This double-duty cleaning tool was not just a means of hygiene, but a symbol of status. After all, nothing says, "I've made it quite like having your own tersorium." The sponge was typically soaked in salt water and kept in a communal bucket, because nothing screams cleanliness like sharing a sponge with 100 of your closest friends. But Gaius's job didn't merely involve counting. No, he had to keep track of the fluctuating inventory levels. We're down to 15 tessoria, he would mutter to himself. Better order some new ones from the local sponge merchant. And here's where things get really interesting. Ordering supplies in ancient Rome was an elaborate bureaucratic affair. Gaius would have to fill out a requisition form, which was probably an intricate scroll more complex than the average tax return. This scroll would include the number of tersoria needed, the desired quality, which inevitably led to debates about the relative softness of various sponge sources, and of course, the signature of a local magistrate, because nothing says efficiency like bureaucratic red tape. Now, let's talk material costs. The financial aspect of public restroom management was as riveting as watching grass grow. The cost of a tersorium fluctuated based on supply and demand. If a particularly rainy season hit the Mediterranean, sponge harvesting would decrease, and suddenly Gaius found himself in a financial pickle. "Darn it," he would lament, "the price of sponges is up again. How will I ever keep the lines moving?" Yes, the fiscal responsibility of restroom management fell squarely on his shoulders, and one can only imagine the sleepless nights he had, wondering if his budget would stretch far enough to cover enough tersoria for the busy summer months. The procurement process also meant dealing with suppliers. merchants who would haggle over prices and delivery times. Picture Gaius, the restroom manager, engaged in negotiations with a sponge merchant, arguing over the quality of sponges like a modern-day car salesman trying to sell you a lemon. But this one has less grit, he would insist as the merchant raised an eyebrow and countered with a discount on a more fibrous option that was practically the same. The art of negotiation in these dealings was critical. Gaius needed to ensure he got the best deal while maintaining a good relationship with the purveyor of cleanliness. And let's not even get started on the paperwork. The Romans were masters of documentation. Gaius would have to file invoices, track deliveries, and maintain records on who was responsible for what, which meant he had to keep an eye on the restroom attendants to ensure they weren't using their own supply of tersoria for personal use. Rumor had it that some attendants would pocket a sponge or two to sell on the black market, leading to a scandal that would rock the very foundations of public sanitation. Now, while Gaius was tirelessly managing inventory, the actual mechanics of queue management required its own level of artistry. Romans were known for their intricate social hierarchies, and this extended to their public restrooms as well. The queue for the latrines was not merely a line. It was a stage for social performance. Those waiting in line would often engage in witty banter, update each other on the latest gossip, or even discuss the finer points of philosophy, all while trying to maintain an air of patience that would rival a Zen master. But the question remained, how did one determine their rightful place in line? This is where the concept of queue etiquette came into play. A Roman citizen could not simply walk up to the head of the line. That would invite the scorn of fellow patrons. Instead, they developed an unspoken code of conduct, which was likely as complex as the rules of a board game that no one quite understood. The length of time spent waiting was often an indicator of one's social standing. Those of noble birth might receive a nod from the restroom attendant, granting them a more expedited passage. Meanwhile, the average plebeian would have to stand in line, contemplating the meaning of life while clutching their tersorium like a lifeline. To further complicate matters, Romans also had to deal with the infamous restroom rush hour, which typically coincided with the end of gladiatorial games or public spectacles. As throngs of citizens poured into the forums, the lines for the latrines grew exponentially. Imagine the scene. A mob of sweaty, shouting Romans, all clamoring for relief after a particularly intense day of blood sport. Gaius, perhaps sensing the impending chaos, would engage in what can only be described as the art of crowd control. He'd strategically place attendants at both ends of the restroom entrance, equipped with wooden sticks to gently prod any line cutters back into their rightful places. And yes, that's right. These sticks were called line keepers, a title that belied their true purpose, serving as a gentle reminder that the lines were not mere suggestions. And then there were the grievances. Oh, the grievances. The Romans, with their love for written communication, would submit formal complaints regarding restroom conditions. The latrines are not cleaned sufficiently, one citizen might write. I demand the return of my entrance fee. This would lead to a flurry of bureaucratic paperwork as Gaius was forced to respond to each complaint with the same level of seriousness one might give to an accusation of treason. Dear citizen, he would write back, I assure you that our tersorium supply is sufficient, and the latrine was scrubbed just last week. Please be patient, and may the gods grant you a smoother experience next time. May the gods grant you a smoother experience next time. Imagine the thrill of reading through a litany of complaints, each one more mundane than the last. From the length of the wait to the softness of the tersoria, it was a treasure trove of trivial complaints that could rival the most boring of modern-day customer service reviews. And you thought Yelp reviews were tedious? Just wait until you read through the scrolls of Roman sanitation complaints. Soundy. As we peel back the layers of this absurdly boring yet utterly fascinating topic, we see that the mundane world of Roman public restroom queue management reveals a tapestry of human experiences, frustrations, and triumphs that ultimately shaped their society. The next time you find yourself restless in a restroom line, remember Gaius, the ancient inventory manager, and the countless souls who stood in line before you. Their struggles with managing supplies, maintaining etiquette, and handling complaints have paved the way for our modern-day experiences. Because if there's one truth about humanity, is that waiting in line for the restroom is an experience that transcends time, culture, and the absurdity of existence itself. As we plunge deeper into the abyss of Roman public restroom queue management, we are compelled to scrutinize the intricacies of inventory procedures. Now, I hear you thinking, inventory. Really? How thrilling. But hold on to your sandals, because the Romans had a bureaucratic system that would make even the most stoic of historians stifle a yawn. Inventory. Picture a bustling Roman forum where traders and citizens mingled, while in the background, the not-so-pleasant aroma of various human activities wafted through the air. It was here that Gaius, our diligent inventory manager, would meticulously record the supply of tessoria, those delightful little sponges on sticks that served as the Romans' version of toilet paper. Tessoria were often made from soft sea sponge, lovingly harvested from the depths of the Mediterranean. The procurement of these sponges was no trivial task, mind you. It involved navigating the treacherous waters of trade agreements, maritime logistics, and the occasional pirate attack. You see, the Romans were nothing if not meticulous in their operations. Gaius would spend countless hours measuring the thickness of each tersorium and conducting rigorous softness assessments. Because who wants a rough sponge after a long day of attending the forum? The inventory ledger was a masterpiece of tedium. It included columns upon columns detailing the quantity received, the quantity used, and, heaven forbid, the quantity expired because, yes, even tersoria have a shelf life. As if that weren't enough to make you question your life choices, there were also the costs associated with these precious sponges. Gaius had to keep a sharp eye on the fluctuating prices of sea sponges, which could vary wildly depending on the season and the whims of the market. If you thought your local grocery store had confusing price tags, imagine trying to keep track of the wholesale rate of sponges while being bombarded by the complaints of disgruntled citizens who felt shortchanged by the quality of their tersoria. In the grand scheme of things, managing the budget for public restrooms was a task that could make even the most seasoned accountant weep. Gaius was faced with the daunting challenge of allocating funds for not just tersoria, but also for maintaining the plumbing infrastructure, which was quite advanced for the time, though perhaps that's a topic for another day. Let's just say the Romans had a flair for engineering, but that didn't prevent the occasional plumbing disaster, resulting in the kind of waterworks that would leave modern plumbing catastrophes feeling somewhat jealous. Now, let's talk about the bureaucratic rules governing restroom etiquette. The Romans took their public sanitation very seriously, and so they devised a set of guidelines that could only be described as a labyrinth of nonsensical regulations. First and foremost was the infamous rule of the 3 tersoria, which dictated that no citizen could utilize more than 3 sponges per visit. The rationale. It seems that the city officials were determined to make sure there was enough tersoria to go around. Hence, they sought to prevent any hogging of the precious resources. Well, imagine the scene. A line of citizens, each one with their own unique grievances, standing outside the public restroom, anxiously clutching their tokens for entry, while Gaius, in all his glory, stands guard at the entrance, ensuring that no one dares exceed the sacred limit. One can only imagine the clandestine whispers that must have circulated among the crowd, Did you hear about Marcus? He tried to sneak in an extra sponge. Can you believe the audacity? Such scandalous behavior could lead to a fine or even a public shaming, which was essentially the ancient Roman equivalent of being unfollowed on social media. Really? And what of those unfortunate souls who found themselves in the queue during peak hours? The Romans were no strangers to the concept of lines, and they knew how to create a sense of urgency that could rival even the most intense modern-day Black Friday shopping sprees. The queue of shame, as it was colloquially known, was marked by a series of painted lines on the ground, which dictated where one must stand while waiting for their turn. These lines were not only practical, but also served as a reminder of one's place in the social hierarchy. After all, no one wanted to be caught standing in the wrong spot, lest they face the wrath of their peers. But let's not overlook the role of the restroom attendant, a position that, while perhaps not glamorous, was crucial for the overall functioning of public sanitation. These brave souls were responsible for ensuring that the restroom facilities were kept clean, stocked with tessoria, and free from any unsightly messes. It was a job that required not only a strong stomach, but also a keen sense of diplomacy. The restroom attendant was often the first point of contact for disgruntled patrons who felt that the tessoria were subpar, or that the facilities had not been adequately maintained. Imagine the daily reports that would find their way to Gaius's desk. Today we had 3 complaints about tersoria that were too coarse for comfort, 2 patrons who found the water supply lacking, and 1 very irate citizen who claimed he was subjected to a wait of over 5 minutes. Such drama! Such tension! Gaius, armed with the knowledge of the bureaucratic protocols, would have to respond swiftly, lest he find himself on the receiving end of the next round of complaints. As we trudge through this quagmire of restroom management, we must also consider the training of the restroom attendants. Yes, there were indeed training sessions for these pivotal positions. Imagine a group of hopeful attendants gathered in a dimly lit room, learning the fine art of spongology. They were taught the intricacies of sponge handling techniques, emergency plumbing procedures, and, perhaps most importantly, the delicate balance of maintaining a courteous demeanor while dealing with irate patrons. The training programs were not just about cleanliness. They also emphasized the importance of communication skills. A restroom attendant had to be able to deftly navigate the dynamic social interactions that unfolded in the queue, responding to complaints with tact and a smile, all while ensuring that the supply of tersoria was adequately replenished. It was a delicate dance, one that required both physical and mental agility. Now, let us not forget the art of handling restroom etiquette among the queue-goers themselves. The Romans, being the social creatures they were, had unwritten rules about who could speak and when. For instance, it was deemed highly inappropriate to strike up a conversation about the weather while waiting in line, unless, of course, you were discussing the weather's impact on sponge harvesting. Instead, one could engage in a hushed debate about the latest political scandal or critique the current emperor's latest public works initiative. This added a layer of complexity to the waiting experience, transforming what could have been a simple act of pressing need into a social event worthy of a symposium. So, as we continue our exploration of this uniquely mundane aspect of Roman life, let us not lose sight of the fact that the public restroom queue was not just a line. It was a microcosm of Roman society. People from all walks of life converged in their shared human experience, bound by the universal need for sanitation. The drama, the etiquette, the painstaking inventory management, and the bureaucratic rules all coalesced into a symphony of absurdity that would leave even the most seasoned historian questioning their career choices. And yet, amid the tedium, there is a beauty to be found in the shared struggle of humanity. As we sit in our modern restrooms, scrolling through our phones while waiting in line. Perhaps we should pay homage to Gaius, the restroom managers of yore, and the intricate systems they put in place. For in the end, the art of waiting in line, whether in ancient Rome or the 21st century, is a testament to our shared experiences, our frustrations, and our undeniable connection to one another, one tessorium at a time. Yeah. Now, let's delve deeper into the labyrinthine world of Roman public restroom queue management, where the stakes were high, and the stakes were, well, not much at all. But that didn't deter the Romans from elevating the mundane to a level of bureaucratic excellence that would make even the most tedious office supply management procedures at your local corporate gig seem exhilarating by comparison. First, we must address the vital question: what exactly were the Romans queuing for? While we might think that the primary goal was to relieve oneself, the truth is far more complicated. A visit to a public latrine was an intricate dance of social interaction, sanitation, and, let's not forget, inventory management. Yes, inventory management. The Romans had a system to keep track of the essential supplies that ensured their latrines were as functional as they were fragrant. Now I see. Picture this. An industrious Roman restroom manager named Gaius, whose entire day revolves around counting the number of tersoria, the delightful little sponges on sticks used for personal cleaning. Gaius would have been the proud owner of a clipboard, or perhaps a wax tablet, meticulously noting every single tersorium in the establishment. And of course, each sponge was assigned a specific cubbyhole in the latrine, labeled with the skillful precision of a bureaucrat who had just received a promotion for his unparalleled attention to detail. Now, let's talk about the costs associated with these tersoria. You might think, how much could a sponge possibly cost? Well, allow me to enlighten you. In ancient Rome, sponges were made from all sorts of natural fibers, including sea sponges that could be quite expensive depending on the season and the whims of the marketplace. The Romans didn't just throw money at the problem. They meticulously calculated the cost per sponge, taking into account the price fluctuations that came with supply and demand. Can you imagine Gaius, sitting in his cramped little office, quill pen in hand, calculating the average cost of a sea sponge, while his fellow citizens were outside enjoying the splendor of the Colosseum? The horror. Alexander. Oh, and let's not forget about the logistics of resupply. The procedure of inventory management was so elaborate that it could rival a military campaign. Gaius had to coordinate with suppliers who harvested these sponges from the Mediterranean Sea, ensuring that they arrived fresh and free of barnacles. Each shipment would be carefully inspected upon delivery, a process so thrilling you'd think it was the unveiling of the next great Roman statue instead of a shipment of sponges. Imagine Gaius, donning a toga and a serious expression, inspecting each tersorium as if it were a work of art, muttering under his breath, "Ah, yes, this one has just the right amount of elasticity. Perfect for public use." Once the supply was secured, Gaius had to develop a bureaucratic system for distribution. The sponges had to be strategically placed at each latrine station, ensuring that no one had to walk more than a few feet to grab one. This was no small feat. Roman citizens were notorious for their impatience, and the last thing Gaius wanted was a riot breaking out over a shortage of tersoria. He could already envision the problems. Senator Lucius is in line, and he was last spotted looking quite uncomfortable. If he has to wait too long, we could have a diplomatic incident on our hands. To manage these potential crises, Gaius instituted a system of color-coded sponges. Yes, you heard that right. The Romans were incredibly advanced in their understanding of color psychology. A red sponge for the high-ranking officials, the senators and patricians, a blue one for the common citizens, and a green sponge for the slaves. This color-coding system allowed for quick identification and gave a sense of hierarchy even in the most vulnerable of situations. Can you imagine the sheer drama of a patrician accidentally grabbing a blue sponge? The embarrassment would have been excruciating. Of course, the queue itself was also governed by a set of unwritten rules that varied from region to region, much like the ever-evolving rules of standing in line at your local coffee shop today. The Romans had a deep-seated respect for social order, and the latrine line was no exception. First come, first served was the basic principle, but the nuances ran deep. For instance, if a high-ranking officer arrived, it was customary for those in line to yield their spot. This practice, known as the senatorial shit shuffle, was a delicate dance of deference and resignation. Imagine standing there, anxiously shifting your weight from foot to foot, wondering if you should be the one to step aside for the toga-clad individual who just strolled up. "Oh no, Marcus, you go ahead. I insist." Meanwhile, in your mind, you're calculating how many minutes you could lose in your day by allowing this privilege. The queue wasn't just a place for waiting. It was a social arena, a stage for gossip, and a chance to engage in light banter. Citizens would exchange pleasantries and complaints about the state of public services, the latest gladiatorial games, or who had the best toga at last week's Senate meeting. The restroom queue was the original social network, a place where connections were forged over shared discomfort and the ever-present threat of unsanitary conditions. Did you hear about the new aqueduct? Apparently it's causing quite the stir, just like this line. The aqueducts. One cannot mention Roman public restrooms without acknowledging the marvels of engineering that kept them flowing, quite literally. Water supply was crucial for the upkeep of latrines, as hygiene was paramount in a society that prided itself on cleanliness, with a healthy dose of irony. Gaius also had to coordinate with the aqueduct overseers, ensuring that the flow of water was sufficient to wash away the refuse. The public restroom was essentially a mini-sewer system, and you can bet that Gaius had to keep his ear to the ground for any news of aqueduct maintenance. If the water supply slows down, we'll have a backlog of patrons, and heaven help us if the Senate finds out. Moreover, let's not overlook the maintenance of the latrines themselves. Gaius had an entire team dedicated to cleaning the facilities, ensuring that the public restrooms did not become the stuff of nightmares. This team, known as the Tersorium Troopers, was responsible for scrubbing down the latrines and ensuring that the walls were free of graffiti, another testament to Roman life. After all, they couldn't have the citizens writing, "Gaius is a loser" on the walls of their beloved public restrooms. Such defamation could lead to significant repercussions, and Gaius certainly didn't want to answer to the Senate for a lack of cleanliness or decorum. In the world of Roman restroom queue management, it was all about the details. With a hierarchy in place, a meticulous inventory system, and an ever-watchful eye on sanitation, Gaius and his fellow restroom managers kept the wheels of society turning, one queue at a time. So, the next time you find yourself groaning in line for the restroom at a concert or a festival, just think of Gaius and the Tersorium Troopers. They mastered the art of waiting in line with grace, dignity, and a whole lot of sponges. Their legacy, though seemingly boring, is a reminder that even in the most mundane aspects of life, there lies a rich tapestry of human experience, complete with inventory management and bureaucratic wrangling. As we delve deeper into the annals of Roman public restroom queue management, we find ourselves at the crossroads of inventory procedures, material costs, and the labyrinthine bureaucratic rules that govern this essential yet shockingly tedious aspect of Roman life. Picture it, Gaius, our beleaguered restroom manager, with a quill in one hand and a scroll of papyrus in the other, meticulously jotting down every single piece of equipment needed to ensure the smooth operation of public latrines. It was truly the stuff that legends are made of, or, more accurately, the stuff that legends forgot to write down because it was simply too mind-numbing. First, let's discuss the inventory. You may think that managing a public restroom would be a straightforward affair, but in the grand arena of Roman bureaucracy, even the simplest tasks could spiral into an elaborate saga of checks and balances. Gaius had to keep an inventory of essential items, which included not just the luxurious sponge on a stick, often called a tersorium, but also the indispensable pots of vinegar used for cleaning the latrines. Yes, vinegar. Because nothing says, "Welcome to your communal toilet," like the sharp, tangy scent of acetic acid wafting through the air. And, Chio. Gaius likely had a ledger that detailed the number of tersoria on hand, how many needed replacing, and the frequency with which they were used. Each sponge would require careful attention. If a tersorium was deemed too worn out, it would be ceremoniously retired and replaced with a fresh new sponge. And then the drama! The retirement of a tersorium could cause a ripple effect throughout the restroom, leading to a temporary shortage. Lines would grow longer, and patrons would grumble about the state of their restroom experience. I can't believe I waited this long just to discover that the tersorium is on sabbatical. They might bemoan, their indignation echoing off the marble walls. But the woes of inventory didn't stop at sponges. Gaius had to keep a sharp eye on the supply of fresh water, which was procured from aqueducts, those engineering marvels that allowed Romans to transport water over long distances. The cost of water was a critical factor in restroom management. Underestimating the water supply could lead to public outcry, or worse, a Senate investigation. Imagine the headlines: Gaius the Unsanitary, a water crisis in the latrines. It was a fate no restroom manager wanted to face, and so meticulous records were essential. This was then compounded by the costs associated with maintaining infrastructure. The Romans, in their infinite wisdom, decided that public restrooms should not only be functional but also palatial. Yes, the latrines were adorned with intricate mosaics and sometimes even marble seats, because if you have to squat, you might as well do it in style. Gaius had to account for all these extravagances while negotiating with the local suppliers for the best prices on marble and tiles. What do you mean the cost has gone up? I won't pay a denarius more than last year. He would insist, bargaining like a seasoned marketplace vendor, while patrons behind him in line rolled their eyes, wishing they could just use the restroom already. Humanisus. Now, let's talk about bureaucratic rules, the crimson tape of the Roman restroom system. Gaius had to navigate a minefield of regulations crafted by the Senate, rules so convoluted that even the most accomplished orator would struggle to make sense of them. There were specific guidelines dictating how many patrons could use a restroom at any given time. With lines forming like the queues for gladiator fights, the last thing Gaius wanted was for the Senate to intervene due to overcrowding. Thus, he had to keep a careful count of the number of individuals entering and exiting the facilities, often employing a system of counters, similar to those used in ancient voting booths. Each time someone exited, a little tally would be marked in his scroll. The tension must have been palpable as he counted each head, praying that the numbers would not exceed the limit. Moreover, Gaius had to follow strict sanitation protocols. This was no mere suggestion. It was a matter of public health, and also a matter of reputation. If a latrine was found to be less than pristine, word would spread like wildfire. Did you hear about the latrine down the street? It was worse than the Colosseum after a lion fight. Patrons would avoid that restroom like the plague, and Gaius would be left to defend his honor in front of a council of stern-faced senators demanding answers, while the citizens of Rome raised their eyebrows in disbelief at his inability to keep things clean. In an effort to maintain order, Gaius also had to coordinate with city guards, known as the vigiles, to ensure that the lines didn't devolve into chaos. Imagine the sight of heavily armored soldiers standing outside the restroom, trying to maintain decorum while patrons fidgeted impatiently. "Excuse me, sir, but I simply must relieve myself," they would exclaim, while the guard, with all the authority of a Roman centurion, would reply, "Patience, citizen. The line moves as swiftly as the Tiber flows." A line of disgruntled Romans would grumble in response, "Aye, but the Tiber flows at a snail's pace today." Still, there were moments of levity in the grand scheme of restroom operations. Gaius may have implemented a reward system to encourage proper etiquette among patrons. For every 5 times you wait in line without complaining, you shall receive a complimentary tersorium, he might have announced to mixed reviews. After all, how does one truly reward someone for waiting in line? The best Gaius could do was offer a sense of camaraderie among those who had shared the same plight, all while standing shoulder to shoulder, contemplating their choices in life as they pondered the philosophical implications of waiting for nature to take its course. Then there were the occasional restroom-themed festivals, because why not celebrate the mundane? These events would be held to promote cleanliness and proper restroom etiquette, complete with games, contests, and even award ceremonies. Imagine citizens competing for the title of fastest latrine user, or best queue waiting pose. It was a sight to behold. People gathered around, cheering on their friends as they dashed through the latrine, only to emerge with the satisfaction of having used the facilities against the clock. The winner would likely receive a golden sponge, a prize that would be the envy of the town. "Look at me. I have conquered the restroom," they would proclaim, basking in the glory of their triumph. As we approach the end of this riveting journey through the tedium of Roman restroom queue management, let us not forget the legacy of Gaius and his meticulous practices. While it may seem absurdly boring to the modern reader, the art of waiting in line was a crucial societal function. It ensured that citizens could conduct their business in relative comfort, a feat not to be taken lightly in an age where public sanitation was still in its infancy. So, the next time you find yourself tapping your foot impatiently in a line, remember the trials of Gaius, the unsung hero of the latrine. His life was a testament to the mundane yet vital aspects of civilization. After all, from queues to sanitation, the Romans taught us that even the most unremarkable parts of life deserve a thorough examination, and perhaps a little sarcasm along the way. As we delve deeper into the labyrinthine world of Roman public restroom queue management, it becomes crucial to address one of the most overlooked aspects of this entire saga: the inventory procedures for the restroom supplies. Yes, dear viewer, you heard that right. In the grand tapestry of Roman civilization, where great generals and philosophers battled for glory, there existed a cadre of diligent clerks, meticulously cataloging the toilet paper equivalent of their time: sponge sticks. Let it be known that the Romans were nothing if not resourceful. The famed sponge on a stick, or tersorium, was an ingenious invention that combined both hygiene and convenience. This device, which can only be described as a medieval toilet brush that doubles as a communal cleaning tool, required careful management. Each public restroom had a designated sponge keeper, a title that sounds far more glamorous than it truly was. Picture this: a beleaguered individual, armed with a list and an unwavering spirit, tasked with ensuring that the sponge sticks were sufficiently stocked, clean, and ideally not too revolting for the next unsuspecting patron. To maintain an accurate inventory, the sponge keeper employed a system remarkably similar to modern-day filing cabinets, albeit with more dirt and considerably less efficiency. Each tersorium was accounted for with a corresponding parchment scroll. These scrolls detailed the number of sponges, the length of the sticks, and if one were lucky, the last recorded date of cleaning, an important metric in preventing disease outbreaks that could wreak havoc in the already fragile Roman public health system. But here's the kicker: each tersorium bore a cost. not in monetary units alone, but in labor hours. The average sponge was produced from a type of sea sponge harvested from the Mediterranean, which meant that the costs of supply fluctuated wildly based on fishing seasons and the whims of the tides. When sea sponge prices soared, as they often did during particularly harsh winters, the public restrooms faced the grim prospect of rationing. Imagine the chaos. A public restroom with a "No sponge today" sign. Utter pandemonium. Citizens would be left scrambling, chanting, "We must share! We must share!" The camaraderie was palpable, albeit soaked in urea. Now, one might wonder, what kind of bureaucracy kept this whole system running? Ah, the Roman bureaucratic machine. A well-oiled, albeit sluggish, beast. Restroom management fell under the purview of the aediles, the city officials responsible for managing public buildings and services. These men, often more concerned with grand spectacles and gladiatorial games, had to allocate a meager portion of their attention to the mundane affairs of restroom upkeep. It was a thankless job, rife with complaints and the occasional public outcry when the mud from the overflowing latrine threatened to seep into the market square. To maintain their power, the aediles devised rules that governed restroom etiquette. Yes, I am talking about the ancient Roman version of a user agreement. Citizens were expected to adhere to a strict code of conduct while waiting in line. For example, no loud complaints were allowed while online, a rule designed to maintain a semblance of dignity as one prepared to engage in the most undignified of acts. Furthermore, any attempt to cut in line was punishable by a fine, one that, as legend has it, could result in public shaming or, in extreme cases, being made to wait even longer. And let's talk about the costs associated with maintaining these public restrooms. The daily upkeep included not just the procurement of sponges, but the sourcing of water for cleaning and, of course, the vital task of removing waste. Enter the latrinales, a term used to describe the unfortunate individuals tasked with managing the waste removal process. Their work was not merely gross, it was essential. Imagine the paperwork involved in tracking the amount of waste removed daily, the routes taken, and how many loads were deemed acceptable for removal. The cost of removing waste from public restrooms was staggering. A full cartload of waste would often be charged at a rate that was, quite ironically, a load of money. These charges were often debated fiercely in the Senate, with various factions arguing whether the burden should fall on the taxpayers or the aediles themselves. The debates could drag on for days, with senators passionately declaring, "What is one man's waste is another man's tax." As if that weren't enough, we must also consider the marketing campaigns employed to promote the proper use of public restrooms. Yes, marketing! The Romans did not shy away from promoting their public amenities. The phrase, "latrinae est divitiae," the restroom is wealth, became a popular slogan, emblazoned on walls and public notices, enticing citizens to embrace their restroom culture. Flyers were distributed in marketplaces, touting the benefits of cleanliness and the importance of waiting one's turn. "Be the first to the throne" was a particularly catchy tagline, though it did raise a few eyebrows among the more prudish citizens. And what about seasonal restroom festivals? Yes, they existed too. The Romans, ever fond of festivals, would host events celebrating sanitation. The Latrina Ludus was a festival dedicated to restroom humor, complete with games that included sponge throwing and a race to see who could wait the longest without complaining. These festivals were a brilliant way to remind citizens of the importance of toilet etiquette, while also providing a much-needed distraction from the more serious matters of state. Who doesn't love a good sponge toss? But the real pièce de résistance of Roman restroom management was the emergence of the queue inspector. This esteemed individual was responsible for ensuring that all patrons adhered to the rules of waiting. Armed with a clipboard, and perhaps a wooden pointer for dramatic effect, the queue inspector's job was to maintain order and enforce the all-important no-cutting rule. Stories abound of inspectors who became legends in their own right, their names whispered in hushed tones among restroom goers. Did you hear about Lucius the Unyielding? He once made a gladiator wait 2 hours just to teach him a lesson. As we wrap our heads around this astonishingly mundane history, it's hard to deny that the Romans had a flair for transforming the banal into the absurd. Their intricate systems of restroom queue management, waste disposal, and sponge procurement may seem inconsequential today, but they remind us that behind every great civilization lies a host of overlooked heroes, bravely navigating the murky waters of a public hygiene. So the next time you find yourself waiting in line, tapping your foot impatiently, think of Gaius, his sponge, and the bureaucratic labyrinth he had to navigate just to relieve himself. Perhaps it's not so dreadful after all, for in the grand scheme of history, we are all just waiting our turn in the great restroom of life. Kenny, Amy, in Hawaii, in Ensai, in. As we delve deeper into the vast abyss of Roman public restroom queue management, it becomes glaringly obvious that it was not just the act of waiting that was significant, but the entire ecosystem surrounding it. Let us now embark on our exploration of the minutiae, the tedium, and the sheer banality of inventory procedures that govern the sponges, ceramic pots, and even the queues themselves. First, let us consider the sponge. The humble sponge. In the Roman era, it was not merely a tool for personal hygiene. It was a commodity. The procurement of sponges was governed by an intricate web of supply chains that would make modern logistics managers weep with envy. Sponges were typically harvested from the depths of the Mediterranean Sea, where braved divers, often not unlike the gladiators they would later encounter in the arenas, plunged into the chilly waters to retrieve these oceanic treasures. Reports from ancient writers suggest that the most desirable sponges could fetch up to 10 denarii each, an astronomical sum considering that a loaf of bread was only a single denarius. Now, let us not gloss over the procurement process. One could hardly stroll into a Roman market and pick up a sponge without navigating the convoluted bureaucracy that dictated such a purchase. First, one would need to secure a permit from the local magistrate, known as the Praefectus Urbi, who might casually inquire about your intentions. What do you need this sponge for? Are you planning on washing a horse? Or perhaps engaging in some sort of nefarious sponge-fighting ring? The questions were endless, and could lead to a lengthy interrogation. Once you had successfully secured your permit, the next step involved a visit to a designated sponge vendor. A rather unpleasant experience, as these vendors were known for their questionable hygiene practices, often leaving the sponges to mingle with rancid fish guts and unidentifiable substances. The vendors themselves were notorious for their haggling skills. 10 denarii? For this? This is a sponge fit for a god. I'll give you 2. The dance of negotiation could stretch on for hours, with the buyer eventually walking away with a sponge that was both overpriced and possibly contaminated with dubious marine life. Next in our bureaucratic odyssey is the inventory management of the public restrooms themselves. Every restroom was not merely a place of relief, but also a carefully monitored establishment, akin to a modern-day stock exchange, only instead of trading stocks, the Romans were trading dignity and a semblance of privacy. Each public restroom had a designated dispensator, an inspector responsible for ensuring that all supplies were adequately stocked. This included not only sponges but also water, which was crucial for both cleaning oneself and for the general sanitation of the facilities. The dispensators were required to maintain meticulous records, lest they incur the wrath of their superiors. If a restroom ran out of sponges or Heaven forbid water. It could lead to chaos. Imagine the horror of 100 citizens suddenly cut off from their sponge supplies. The dispensator would have to produce a report detailing the number of sponges on hand, the condition of each sponge. Yes, there were quality assessments, and the estimated time until the next delivery. These reports were sent up a chain that would make a military general sweat, a veritable game of telephone that often resulted in miscommunications and occasionally riots. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the costs associated with all of this. The Roman state was not made of gold. It was made of taxes, and taxes were often collected with a ruthless efficiency that left citizens clamoring for the small change left behind after their obligatory contributions. The cost of maintaining a public restroom was significant. Aside from the procurement of sponges and water, there were also the costs of labor, paying the dispensators and janitors, whose job included the not-so-glamorous task of cleaning out the latrine pits. Yes, the latrine pits. Those deep, dark abysses that housed the waste of the entire city. The smell alone could knock a citizen back several paces. The financial aspect of restroom management often found its way into political debates. Senators would gather in the forum, passionately arguing over the best way to allocate funds for public hygiene. "I propose we divert funds from the new aqueduct project," one senator might shout, only to be met with gasps of horror from colleagues who understood that without clean drinking water, the entire city could devolve into chaos. "No one will care about clean toilets if they can't drink," they would retort, and thus the great restroom budget debates would rage on. Next, we must touch upon the bureaucratic rules governing the queues themselves. The Romans had a system of line management that would put today's amusement park operators to shame. Each restroom was marked with a sign indicating the maximum occupancy, usually no more than 10 citizens at a time, due to the limited space and the unfortunate acoustics of the facilities. The occupants were instructed to maintain a strict silence while in the chamber, a rule that caused much grumbling among users accustomed to their raucous banter while waiting. To ensure compliance, restroom officials, often young apprentices under the watchful eye of seasoned dispensators, were stationed outside to monitor the queues. If a citizen dared to engage in conversation, they would be met with a stern glare and a pointed finger, reminding them of the sanctity of the restroom experience. It was not uncommon for these young officials to wield small wooden paddles, not for punishment, but as a means of enforcing quietude. An absurdly charming twist on the modern day "Please keep your voice down" signs. And let us not forget the intricate system used to determine the order of those waiting. The Romans employed a method known as prioritas. It was a complex algorithm that took into account factors such as age, social status, and intriguingly, the size of one's toga. The larger the toga, the higher the priority. An early form of privilege that often left the common citizen seething in the back of the line. "Why is Gaius getting in ahead of me? He's only here to gossip," they would mutter, while Gaius, oblivious to the ire he had incited, strutted toward the latrine with the air of a victorious general. Wadin, Ibroma, Jiria, Waria. A particularly fascinating aspect of this queue management was the waiting tokens. Yes, you heard that right. In an attempt to streamline the process, citizens were issued small clay tokens that indicated their place in line. These tokens, adorned with varying symbols, could be traded or gifted, allowing for a sort of black market restroom queue system. "I'll trade you my fish token for a toga token," one might hear in hushed whispers as desperate citizens sought to gain favor with dispensators or gain an edge over their fellow line waiters. Such absurdity may seem trivial today, but in the grand tapestry of Roman life, it was a reflection of the civilization's obsession with order and cleanliness. even in the most unclean of places. One can only imagine the conversations that swirled around these public restrooms. Tales of conquests, gossip about neighbors, and all while attempting to maintain the dignity that the Romans so desperately clung to, even amidst the chaos of their daily lives. So, as we immerse ourselves further into this utterly captivating saga of restroom management, let us take a moment to appreciate the sheer absurdity of it all. The Romans, in their infinite wisdom, turned the mundane into an organized spectacle, creating a legacy of restroom etiquette that echoes through the ages. And as we stand in our own pews today, remind yourself, behind every boring line, there lies a history rich with bureaucracy, sponges, and the relentless pursuit of public hygiene. As we dive deeper into the Roman obsession with public restroom queue management, we must explore the minutiae of inventory procedures that would make even the most ardent bureaucrat swoon with delight, or perhaps frustration. Picture this: the local aedile, a magistrate tasked with overseeing public works, would find himself surrounded by scrolls and wax tablets, meticulously detailing every aspect of the restroom's operation. Among these essential documents, one would find the Tabula de Fortis, a table detailing the inventory of sponges, a crucial component of Roman hygiene that somehow managed to remain both vital and utterly forgettable. Sponges, those unsung heroes of the ancient restroom, were not just random bits of sea life. They were a carefully monitored resource. The average Roman public restroom required a supply of approximately 3 sponges per toilet, or latrina, to ensure that patrons could partake in the age-old tradition of communal wiping. This led to a complex system of inventory management that would make even the most tedious of modern supply chain managers roll their eyes in envy. The procurement of sponges involved meticulous calculations, taking into account the average number of patrons per day, seasonal fluctuations in sponge availability, because who knew when the Mediterranean would have a particularly bountiful sponge harvest? And of course, the ever-looming threat of sponge theft. Imagine the aedile, armed with a rather unsophisticated abacus, calculating how many sponges would be needed for the upcoming festival of Saturnalia. This annual event was notorious for drawing in crowds, and with increased patronage came the pressing need for more sponges. The complexities of supply would lead to heated, drawn-out debates in local council meetings, with a legion of local citizens eagerly anticipating the decisions that would determine whether they would have a sufficient number of sponges to maintain dignity during the festivities. Now, is there anything more thrilling than a passionate discourse on sponge inventory? I think not. The costs associated with restroom maintenance extended far beyond sponges. The Roman Empire, in its quest for public hygiene, had to grapple with the financial burden of aqueduct construction, which provided the vital water supply necessary for flushing and cleaning these public latrines. The construction of aqueducts was a monumental endeavor, involving significant expenditures of labor and resources. The famous Aqua Appia, for instance, was rumored to have cost 300,000 sesterces, which in today's money could probably buy you a decent sports car, or, a lifetime supply of sponges, because priorities. With all this talk of costs, let's not forget about the materials used in constructing the latrines themselves. The Romans didn't just slap together a couple of wooden benches and call it a day. Oh no. They opted for elegant stonework and intricate drainage systems to ensure that their public restrooms were as aesthetically pleasing as they were functional. The stone was quarried with the utmost care, and the selection process was akin to choosing one's next spouse. Only the finest would do. Local masons, armed with chisels and an alarming level of pride, would be tasked with crafting these public marvels, often competing to see who could create the most opulent restroom. Now, this obsession with stonework led to some truly extravagant public latrines, with marble seats and elaborate mosaics depicting the gods of sanitation. perhaps to remind users that the divine was always observing their bathroom habits. The costs associated with these opulent displays of restroom architecture would often necessitate public funding, leading to a labyrinthine web of laws governing how much could be spent and how often repairs could be made. Bureaucratic procedures dictated that a public restroom could only be renovated every 5 years, unless, wait for it, there was a public health emergency. Yes, dear viewers, public health emergency was in fact a term used in ancient Rome that referred not only to actual diseases, but also to the unfortunate consequences of a restroom that had fallen into disrepair. A significant aspect of restroom operations was the appointment of latrinari, those brave souls responsible for keeping the latrines in working order. They were akin to the custodians of their time, facing an uphill battle against the elements, human nature, and those pesky town drunks who thought it amusing to muck about in the facilities. The latrinari were often appointed through a convoluted process involving a labyrinth of forms and approvals, ensuring that the best candidate with the most impeccable hygiene record was chosen. They were responsible for everything from sponge inventory checks to the sanitation of the latrines, and their weekly reports would often be meticulously examined by the ADL staff for adherence to public hygiene standards. Imagine the thrill of reading through these reports, filled with phrases like, "The sponge count has decreased by 2 due to unforeseen circumstances," or "The latrine at the forum needs urgent attention due to an increase in foot traffic." It was the kind of odd drama that would keep the citizens of Rome on the edge of their seats, or, at the very least, on the edge of their benches while they waited to do their business. Of course, every operation needs rules, and the public restroom was no exception. The Romans crafted an impressive array of bureaucratic regulations surrounding restroom etiquette. For instance, there were strict guidelines dictating the order in which citizens could use the facilities. Those of higher social standing were granted priority, leading to a veritable hierarchy of restroom access that would make a modern-day nightclub look like a communal gathering of friends. Senators, patricians, and other dignitaries would stride boldly to the front, while the plebeians could only stand in line, grumbling about their misfortune and plotting revenge over the next amphora of wine. This hierarchical annoyment was, of course, documented in a series of scrolls known as the Lex Latrinarum, which outlined the rights and responsibilities of every citizen when it came to public restroom usage. Yes, you heard it right. There was an actual law governing restroom behavior. The Lex mandated that those caught violating the established order could face penalties ranging from fines to public shaming. And nobody wanted to be the subject of a public shaming in a society where reputation was everything. Can you imagine the scandal of being publicly rebuked for cutting in line? The horror! And for those caught without a sponge, the penalty was even more severe. You see, the Romans had a strict, no sponge, no service policy, an unspoken rule that was enforced with a maniacal fervor. The idea of being caught without the most essential tool of hygiene was considered a fate worse than being banished to a desert island with nothing but a collection of ancient scrolls on the history of agricultural practices. The shame, the horror, the lack of basic cleanliness. This convoluted web of restroom rules extended to the very design of the latrines themselves. The Romans, in their quest for efficiency, employed a design that allowed multiple users simultaneous access to a row of toilets, separated only by minimal partitions. This arrangement facilitated a unique form of communal bonding, as patrons shared their most intimate moments with their fellow citizens, because nothing says camaraderie like discussing the latest gladiatorial games whilst perched upon a stone seat, right? Now, and let us not forget the infamous latrinae publicae, those grand public latrines that were often outfitted with elaborate murals and mosaics depicting scenes of leisure and relaxation, perhaps intended to distract the users from the rather unpleasant reality of their situation. Nothing like a picturesque depiction of a pastoral landscape to help one forget the stench and discomfort of communal defecation. In the end, what emerges from this exploration of Roman public restroom queue management and the absurd levels of bureaucracy attached to it is a picture of a society that, despite its grandeur and sophistication, was deeply concerned with the trivialities of everyday life. Whether it was sponges, seating arrangements, or the complicated hierarchy of restroom access, the Romans demonstrated that even the most mundane aspects of existence were worthy of careful consideration and meticulous planning. So, as you reflect on the mundane details of restroom management in ancient Rome, remember that beneath the surface lies an entire civilization grappling with the very essence of cleanliness, order, and the eternal struggle of waiting in line. As you stand in your own queues today, take a moment to appreciate the rich tapestry of history that brought us to this point. A history woven with sponges, bureaucracy, and a sardonic sense of humor that echoes through the ages. After all, if the Romans could turn the act of using a public restroom into a matter of civic duty, surely we can endure a few minutes of line waiting in exchange for the conveniences of modern hygiene. Now, let's delve deeper into the awe-inspiring world of Roman public restroom queue management, where every moment spent waiting was a triumph of patience, and every detail was meticulously recorded like an epic poem, albeit one that only a city planner could amaze. Love. The Romans, being the detail-oriented folks they were, didn't just leave restroom access up to chance. No, they developed a sophisticated system to ensure that no one would be left behind, or worse, forced to wait too long in a queue that could stretch longer than a senator's speech about the virtues of olive oil. First, let's talk about inventory procedures, because what could be more riveting than a discussion about stock-taking in the realm of public sanitation? The public latrines were not just lavishly decorated with mosaics that would make even the most jaded artist weep. They were also stocked with an array of essential items. Imagine the bustling clerks, quills in hand, diligently noting down the inventory of sponges on sticks, which were ingeniously used for cleaning oneself after doing one's business. Yes, these sponges were the toilet paper of their time, and someone had to keep track of how many were available, because who wants to find themselves in a sticky situation? Quite literally, due to a lack of supplies. The Romans developed a complex system to manage these inventories. Every week, appointed officials would conduct inspections of the restroom stock. They'd likely have a list of approved vendors who specialized in sponge production, which, in a way, was the ancient equivalent of choosing the right brand of toilet paper. These vendors had to meet strict quality standards, ensuring that the sponges were not too coarse, ouch, or too soft. Hello, mushy disaster. The cost of sponges fluctuated based on availability and demand, much like the latest fashion trends in togas, and the procurement process required extensive paperwork. Yes, paperwork. Just imagine the thrill of filling out forms for public hygiene supplies in a language no one uses anymore. What a time to be alive. Moving on to material costs, we can't overlook the financial implications of maintaining these state-of-the-art latrines. The Romans were savvy enough to realize that cleanliness was not just next to godliness. It was a very lucrative business model. Maintaining a public restroom wasn't simply about the upkeep of a few benches and a couple of sponges. Oh no! There were costs associated with the construction of the restroom itself, which could include everything from the marble countertops to the elaborate plumbing systems that channeled waste away, lest the entire city be engulfed in a rather unpleasant aroma. Considering the construction costs, one must also take into account the labor required. Skilled laborers were needed to carve out seats that boasted the perfect angle for maximum comfort. And let's not forget the artisans who created the intricate tilework that adorned the restroom floors. Imagine the discussions that took place among the laborers as they decided whether to use the standard mosaic design or something more avant-garde, like a depiction of a sea monster that only the bravest souls would dare to sit over. It's these moments of indecision that kept the ancient world on the edge of its seat, literally. Now, each public restroom had a designated queue management system that could rival the most complex modern-day traffic patterns. Romans were no strangers to rules, and this extended to how one should approach the art of lining up for a potty break. The queue was not merely a linear formation. It was a carefully orchestrated ballet of human bodies, where each participant had to be acutely aware of their position in relation to the restroom entrance. A misstep here could lead to chaos, and chaos was something the Romans had little tolerance for. Unless it was during gladiatorial games, of course. The rules for lining up were etched into the minds of citizens, much like the 12 tables of law with their own set of unspoken etiquette. For instance, it was customary to stand at least a foot away from the person in front of you, allowing for a personal bubble that was respected across all classes. This was critical because personal space was sacred, especially when you considered that the restroom was a sharing space, and no one wanted to feel like they were invading someone else's territory while waiting to relinquish their burdens. Yes. To further enhance efficiency, some restrooms employed a system of tokens. Yes, tokens. Imagine a world where you had to present a small piece of clay or metal before entering the restroom, a tangible symbol of your right to access this most sacred space. Each token was stamped with the insignia of the city or the restroom's overseer, ensuring that only those who had waited their turn could gain entry. Misplacing your token would result in a dramatic scene, much like dropping your phone in a crowded subway. Alas, the humiliation of having to explain to the restroom attendant why you were tokenless was a fate worse than being stuck waiting in a line behind someone who had just consumed a plate of beans. Speaking of restroom overseers, we must address the bureaucratic rules surrounding their appointments. These positions were not merely handed out through nepotism or bribery. Oh no. It was a matter of great pride to be named the overseer of a public restroom. Applicants had to undergo a rigorous vetting process that evaluated their understanding of hygiene standards, queue management, and, quite importantly, their ability to maintain a calm demeanor in the face of a distressed patron. This was a job that required juggling not only the logistics of restroom operations, but also the emotions of those waiting in line. Imagine the daily meetings these restroom overseers would hold, gathering in a marble chamber to discuss the pressing issues of the day, namely, the cleanliness of the sponges and the efficiency of the queue. Each meeting would conclude with a round of applause for the best queue manager of the month, where the winner received a laurel wreath made from the finest leaves. It was a coveted honor, and it certainly made for great dinner conversation. Oh, did I tell you I managed the restroom queue at the Forum last week? I had everyone in and out in record time. And let's not forget the necessary inspections and reports mandated by the Senate. Yes, the Senate. Just when you thought the mundane world of restroom management couldn't get any more exciting, enter the political oversight. Restroom overseers had to submit regular reports detailing the foot traffic, supply usage, and in some unfortunate cases, incidents of overflow. These reports were filed with the utmost care, detailing everything from the number of patrons served to the frequency of sponge replacements. Each report was a testament to the Roman commitment to order, sanitation, and, dare I say, an odd sense of pride in the minutiae of public restroom operation. As we meander through this labyrinth of ancient bureaucracy and restroom queue dynamics, let us not forget the cultural impact that these practices had on society. The very act of waiting in line for what could only be described as a natural necessity, became an important social ritual. It provided Romans with an opportunity to engage in gossip, discuss the latest political scandal, or even debate the merits of different olive oils while they waited for their chance to sit atop the intricately designed marble seats. In a world where public life and private needs intertwined, even the act of waiting became a shared experience, binding the community together in the most unexpected ways. So, the next time you find yourself standing in line, growing impatient as you scroll through your phone, think back to those stalwart Romans patiently awaiting their turn at the public latrine. They too faced the trials of waiting in line, armed only with their wits, their tokens, and a sense of duty to uphold the sacred practices of hygiene. And who knows, maybe they would have appreciated a good smartphone app for restroom wait times. But alas, that's a luxury that would have to wait for another day, just like the line they stood in. One day. Dear viewers of Sleepless Historian, as we delve deeper into the fascinating world of Roman public restroom queue management, we must turn our attention to the oft overlooked, yet profoundly tedious, aspects of inventory procedures, material costs, the bureaucratic rules that govern these vital facilities. Yes, you heard me right. Inventory procedures. Hold on to your togas, because this ride is about to get even more exhilarating than a day spent in the queue itself. You may seem aimed. In the heart of ancient Rome, where public toilets were as common as bread in circuses, the management of these facilities was no small feat. The maintenance and operation of public restrooms required an army of workers, each with their own specialized duties, from the esteemed latrinarius, the master of public latrines, to the humble attendant, whose job it was to ensure that the waiting line not devolve into utter chaos. This was no easy task, especially considering the sheer volume of patrons who relied on these communal facilities daily. Now, let's talk about inventory. Imagine a Roman official tasked with keeping track of the essential supplies needed for the maintenance of public restrooms. We're not just talking about cleaning supplies here. Oh no, we're dealing with a whole host of materials, including but not limited to sponges on sticks, the ancient equivalent of toilet paper, buckets for the removal of waste, and of course the ever-important tokens used to manage access. Can you picture the excitement of a day spent counting sponges? It's the stuff of dreams, folks. But what about material costs, you ask? Well, sit tight, because this gets even more riveting. The procurement of these materials was governed by a budget that, like any good Roman citizen's toga, was tightly cinched. The sponges, which were routinely sourced from the Mediterranean, had to be purchased in bulk. You see, the cost of sponges fluctuated seasonally, much like the price of olives. A particularly bountiful harvest of sponges could lead to a delightful surplus, allowing for a few extra sponges to be allocated to the more popular public restrooms, while a lean year could send the officials scrambling to maintain the supply chain. And let's not forget about the cost of labor. Roman workers were paid with denarii, and the rate varied based on their level of expertise. The latrinarius, being the crème de la crème of restroom management, commanded a higher salary, while the attendants, whose skills included the art of sponge retrieval and token distribution, earned a bit less. Imagine a lively debate amongst officials about whether to increase the attendants' wages, with all the fervor of a Senate session discussing the latest taxation reforms. As if managing supplies and costs weren't enough. There were also bureaucratic rules that dictated the operations of public restrooms. These regulations were as intricate as the designs on the mosaics that adorned the floors of these toilets. For instance, there were strict guidelines about the spacing of the marble seats, because what good is a public restroom without the perfect social distancing? Each seat had to be spaced precisely 3 feet apart to allow for maximum comfort and minimal awkwardness during those intimate moments of shared vulnerability. The Romans took the concept of restroom etiquette very seriously. The queue was a dance, a carefully choreographed performance where each participant had to learn the unspoken rules. If someone dared to jump the line, it was akin to committing treason. This was not merely about access to a toilet. It was about honor, respect, and the social fabric of Roman life. There were even reports of public shaming for those who failed to observe the sanctity of the line. Can you imagine the scornful glares as a line cutter was met with disapproving hisses? Truly scandalous. The queue management system in Roman public restrooms was also a marvel of logistics. Each toilet would have a sign at the entrance indicating the number of available seats, and attendants were tasked with counting patrons as they entered and exited. For the particularly popular restrooms, patrons would often find themselves waiting in line for several minutes. During peak hours, it was essential for the attendants to manage the flow, ensuring that those who had just finished their business didn't linger too long on the marble throne, lest they hold up the entire operation. Yeah. Moreover, Romans introduced a token system to regulate access to these facilities. Each patron was required to present a token upon entry, a small but significant piece of brass or wood that indicated they had paid their due. These tokens were collected in a box at the entrance, where a diligent attendant would count them like a modern-day bank teller. Mismanagement of tokens could lead to serious consequences. Imagine the chaos if half the tokens went missing. The resulting scandal would have made for some fascinating gossip around the latrines, the very heart of Roman social life. Now, to complicate matters further, there were the infamous restroom inspection days. Yes, such days existed where officials would descend upon public restrooms with a clipboard and a keen eye for detail. They would assess everything from the cleanliness of the facilities to the condition of the sponges. A poorly maintained restroom could lead to a fine for the latrinarius, and in extreme cases, the loss of their position. The threat of public humiliation loomed large over anyone responsible for the upkeep of these sacred spaces. And let's not overlook the impact of weather on restroom usage. Rainy days brought their own set of challenges, with patrons reluctant to venture out into the elements. On such days, restroom queues could stretch out far beyond the usual lengths, prompting clever Romans to devise strategies for maximizing their time spent waiting in line. You could overhear discussions on the latest techniques for engaging in small talk, or who had the best remedies for chilly drafts wafting through open doorways. Speaking of drafts, it's worth noting that the architecture of these public restrooms was designed with airflow in mind. Romans understood the importance of ventilation, and an open-air design was often preferred to mitigate the odors that could quickly turn an otherwise pleasant social gathering into a veritable nightmare of smells. Were those architectural decisions made with the intention of creating a better experience for patrons, or were they simply a clever ruse to encourage more lively conversation while one awaited their turn? Genie. Weiss. In the midst of all this activity, one can't help but appreciate the role humor played in the daily lives of the Romans. The restroom was not merely a place for business. It was a venue for jokes, banter, and clever repartee. If you were waiting in line, you might hear a friend shout, "If I knew that would take so long, I would have brought my own olive oil to pass the time." Such antics lightened the mood, turning a mundane wait into an opportunity for laughter, camaraderie, and perhaps a bit of mild embarrassment. Through all these intricacies, dear viewers, one must marvel at the sheer absurdity of it all. The Romans managed to take something as undeniably boring as waiting in line for a public restroom and transform it into a veritable tapestry of social engagement and logistical prowess. So, the next time you find yourself sighing heavily as you stand in line, remember the Romans, the true masters of the art of waiting. Who knew that the history of public restroom queue management could be so, well, enthralling. Eh, eh, and with that, let us all take a moment to appreciate the next queue we find ourselves in, for it is not just a line, it is a shared experience, a testament to our collective history, and perhaps, just perhaps, a reminder that waiting can sometimes be as rich with stories as the restrooms themselves. Well, there you have it, folks. The thrilling saga of Roman public restroom queue management and the exquisite art of waiting in line. Who knew that the ancient Romans, with all their grand architecture and epic conquests, also had to master the fine balance of social etiquette and bladder control? From the strategic arrangement of benches to the unspoken rules of who cuts and who waits, is a wonder they had any time to strategize world domination. I So next time you're stuck in a line for the bathroom, just remember, you're partaking in a time-honored tradition that dates back to the days of toga-clad citizens and marble toilets. D. If you found this riveting deep dive into the mundane as utterly captivating as I did, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about your own restroom line experiences. We want to hear your tales of wait time, whoa! Nah. And of course, don't forget to turn on loop, because who wouldn't want to relive the excitement of Roman restroom queues over and over again?